And we are live, ladies and gentlemen. This is Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast. Thank you very much for being here. I see there's a lot of you in the chat already. And we have an extra special show for you guys tonight. We are joined by Jahannah James, who has an excellent YouTube channel, and she's been diving into the ancient mysteries, especially the Atlantis stuff. So we wanted to have her on the show to have a conversation with Randall. So thank you very much for being here, Johanna.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
It's a Monday night where I am. I'm from London, and it's coming up to midnight, and so this is awesome. This makes Monday nights so cool.
Ordinarily, this would be my nap time.
Oh, sorry.
So I'm making a great sacrifice to be here at this time.
I appreciate it, and I'm fangirling. I've got to admit, Randall.
Oh, shucks.
Yeah, we saw your surprise when somebody told you that Randall had done a response to your Atlantis video.
Okay, yeah.
That was great real time. We're like, yeah, she's happy about that.
Yeah,
well, some of the comments that came up and some of the questions were exactly things that I was thinking, we didn't address that in our 10 hours. So it gave me a good opportunity to address some of the issues that people commonly raise when having a discussion about Atlantis.
So just in case anyone's wondering, I make YouTube videos based on like ancient mysteries, ancient histories, and I decided to make like a condensed what I could understand of Randall's videos. I went through like 10 hours of your videos all about the Atlantis, and they were amazing. And I was like, okay, if I could try and explain this to someone in like 20 minutes, if I had 20 minutes to say who like Randall Carlson's work. And so, yeah, I just made that kind of also to get it like straight in my head, what you were trying to say. And then you saw the video and then you did like a response. So that was amazing. That was freaking out. People were messaging me being like, yo, Randall's replied to your Randall video. I was like, well, this is the internet. This is great.
Well, I was impressed. I had to say you did a very admirable job of condensing it. You really to a bite-sized, digestible amount, because I'm well known for I'm like the Grateful Dead of these, 6 or 7 or 8 hours of jams. So I can go and go and go until I collapse. So it's always a challenge for me to try to figure out how to pull this in, contain it to where like normal people can comprehend it. Because I tend to be in this big picture world where I'm looking at this vast array of details and pulling all the pieces together. And then I realize, and somebody will ask me a question and I'll kind of start on this loop and I'll make this huge circle around. And then I'm, an hour and a half later, I'm coming back to the original point. And in the interim, I pretty much lost everybody that,
you're
certainly one of your gifts.
You're so insanely knowledgeable and super clever. Like, I'm not going to lie. I had to watch some of the vids. I had to like rewatch them a few times to like, because it's just, there's so much science and so much information. But that's kind of what my channel is, because I've got like no training in science or history. I'm not qualified in any way, shape or form. I'm just a geek and I'm just interested. So my channel, my kind of goal, I was like, what if I could kind of get people interested in ancient history that otherwise would just completely would go over their head? Or so that's why my style of content is like very digestible 20-minute videos trying to explain and tell people, yo, you have no idea like what's going on in the ancient history world. School, it was all wrong. And yeah, it's kind of exciting to see people turn on and tune in. I think you're doing a great job.
And see, I've been convinced now by all of my colleagues that we need to do more 20-minute stuff.
Yes.
And I finally conceded that, okay, I get it, because there's a lot of people out there, that need that. And maybe, we're kind of looking at it. I'm looking at it kind of as a fishing expedition, put stuff out there that people can actually wrap their heads around, but then maybe it'll also elicit a deeper interest. And they'll come back to it and invest the time and actually start learning about it. So that's now where I'm coming from. I'm always we don't want to dumb this down. But at the same time, I go, okay, well, where was I at when I was, say, 17 or 18? That's what I'm trying to look at it from.
So just a question around it. How did you get into it? Like, what was the thing that made your head turn and go, oh, old stuff?
You directed that to Brad?
No, Randall, sorry.
You.
Oh, me. Oh,
yes.
We did a little bit of that last go around.
Of course, Brad, I will ask you as well. Absolutely. Hey. But Randall first.
Well, I've been asked that question quite a bit, and I've tried to pinpoint whether there was any specific moment where, like, I had this epiphany, and there wasn't really. It was just a slow kind of accumulation of things. The main thing I would attribute to, though, is growing up in rural Minnesota, and where we lived was right on the edge of the Great Ice Sheet. So for tens of thousands of years, these ice sheets came down, they receded, they expanded, they receded, and right in that zone is where I grew up. And I was always fascinated by the landscapes around me, the lakes and the hills. There always seemed to be, like, I guess with most people would kind of like a hill is just a hill. I would be going, well, why is that hill standing there, like out in the middle of the field? Why is there a hill right there? Mm-hmm. One of the things was going with our family used to go up to a place called St. Croix Falls, which is on the St. Croix River, wild and scenic river that marks the boundary of Minnesota and Wisconsin. And there's a confluence there in a narrow constriction that's very hard basalt outcrops. And we used to go there as kids, and up on the basalt outcrops that are maybe 60 to 70 feet above the present river, there's almost like shelves. And then in the surface of these are these deep potholes. Some of them are up to 80 feet deep and 20 feet wide, circular holes that have been drilled into the bedrock. So go there as a kid, and it had something to do with the Ice Age, but very, very vague what that was. So I think it was 1969. I went up there with some friends, and we were doing some things that were probably not legal at the time, and probably maybe still aren't. But anyways,
oil painting.
Yeah, there we go.
Wink, wink.
Yes. But I remember having this sense that what happened here? What would drill these holes in the rock like this? So that was planted the seed. And then, there was another event where, and I've told this story, but it was outside of Minneapolis, south of Minneapolis. There's the Minnesota River that flows into the Mississippi right there by St. Paul, Minnesota. And there was a bluff above the river, about 200-foot high bluffs, and there was a flat area up there that was flat enough that they had an airport there. Next to the airport, they used to have rock concerts in the late 60s, early 70s, and I used to go to those rock concerts. And sometimes I would wander away from the group, and I would stand up on that bluff, and right down below is the Minnesota River. Now, there was a time, one day I was standing there looking down, and there was the Minnesota River flowing through, and I was looking at the Minnesota was kind of flowing within the banks, right? There was, and you kind of meandering, and then you could see the banks, and then 3 miles across was another set of bluffs that kind of matched the bluffs I was on. And I remember standing there and kind of going, that's kind of like a smaller version, or this is like a bigger version of what I'm looking at down there. And it was in my mind, and then I kind of forgot about it. But it always stuck in my mind. And then the following summer, which was the summer of 1970, me and a buddy just spent the whole summer traveling, hiking, hitchhiking around all of the Western states. And what really impressed me, there was a couple of things. Flaming Gorge in Wyoming was very impressive. And I remember camping on the edge of the gorge and looking in there and really starting to get this sense of, okay, because the usual explanation is you look at something like that, it's millions and millions of years of geological change, one grain of sand, one drop of water at a time. But what really impressed me was going through the Columbia Gorge across the Cascades where it cuts through. And there are these tributaries, tributary rivers that come in. And at the mouths of these tributary rivers are these massive delta fans. You know what a delta fan is? A delta, you know what a delta? Okay,
No.
A delta is when a river is carrying sediment and it's moving water and it comes into a standing body of water. The sediment that it's carrying will begin to build this fan-shaped formation under the water.
Yep,
Like the city of New Orleans is built on a delta, right?
Okay.
Because the Mississippi River has come down, carried enormous amounts of sediment and deposited them in the Gulf of Mexico. So anyways, these fans were hundreds of feet above the river. Now, I didn't know anything about geology at the time, but there was something about them that just struck me as weird. Like, what is going on here? And so it was by 1970, I had really started getting curious about things,
Yeah.
And it didn't really gel for probably another 5 to 8 years. I think around 77, 78, I met somebody who was researching, they were writing a book. And they turned me on to the work of Charles Hapgood, who was I think he was an anthropologist who
I've heard you mention him.
Yeah. So he was one of the small group of mid-20th century researchers that could be called catastrophists, who kind of thinking outside that strictly gradualist model that almost all geologists thought in terms of, right? So he was writing this book and utilizing a lot of Hapgood's work. So, and up to this point, I had a couple of things. I had gotten really interested in I was always interested in mythology. So that was an important parallel pathway that eventually merged in.
Right.
And at that point, I had become familiar with Greek mythology and the myth of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who were the survivors of the Great Flood in ancient Greece.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Norse mythology, Ragnarok, and the wars of the gods, and the Midgard serpent that wrapped around the earth, and all of these kinds of things. My head was filled with these mythic images of these tremendous things. The myth of Phaeton. Phaeton was the son of Helios that fell to earth and set the world on fire. And
yes.
I'm going to be getting into that. I did get into some of that in my Atlantis, because Plato, in his account of Timaeus, he introduces the story of Atlantis by making a reference to the myth of Phaeton, which I think is auspicious. I think there's
parallels to like the Younger Dryas comet. Yeah.
So then you've heard of the Hopi Indians of the southwestern United States. The Hopis. Yeah. Okay, so the Hopis are an ancient tribe. They live out in the Four Corners region of the Southwest. They're descended from the ancient Chacoan people who built all these mysterious structures all over the Southwest, the San Juan Basin in New Mexico, the Four Corners area around Colorado, Utah. Mm-hmm. So in the early 70s, I read a book about their mythology by Frank Waters, and he was talking about their concepts of 4 worlds that preceded this one, and they were all destroyed by these great catastrophes. And then they had prophecies that eventually, if we didn't start paying attention to the plan of the creator, this world would be destroyed in a catastrophe. So I had a lot of that kind of mythic imagery in my head by the late 1970s, when I read, Velikovsky, Emanuel Velikovsky, who was sort of the dean of catastrophist thinking back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And he wrote a book called Earth in Upheaval. Now, Earth in Upheaval was basically his gathering of evidence from geology, paleontology, mythology, that there had been catastrophes in Earth history. So he was completely outside the mainstream at that time. So I think I read his book, 75, 76, something like that. And then, then I discovered Hapgood's work. So I made I had gotten so fascinated by the whole phenomenon at that point that I set out as a goal to try to track down all of Hapgood's copious references. And there was like over 300 of them. So around 79 or 80, there's a science library here, not too far from where I live. And it's open to the public, but it's very underused. So I went in there and with my list of references and started looking stuff up.
Old school.
Old school. Yeah.
Yeah.
No internet then. So
yeah, I know. Like today, people can find out anything on the internet. You had to
oh
go
yeah,
and
yeah. I
put
mean,
the
I haven't
hours
even
in.
been to a library now in a couple of years because I can pretty much get almost everything.
Yeah.
But so the librarian there got really interested in my research that I was doing. And then one of the astronomers there also got interested because he was doing work on, now this is, you got about 1980, see, was like a hinge point. 1980 is where you can really see things started shifting because 1980 was the year that 3 separate teams came up with papers proposing that the extinction of the dinosaurs was catastrophic and not gradual, and that it was triggered by some kind of an extraterrestrial impact, right? The most famous was the Walter C. Alvarez and his team paper that came out in 1980, where they had discovered the magic layer in Italy, the iridium layer. Now, iridium is a platinum group metal that's very rare on the surface of the Earth because it's a siderophile, meaning it likes to bond with iron. So in the early days of Earth formation, when all of the iron, sank to the core, it dragged the iridium with it. So iridium is very rare on the surface of the Earth, but it's very plentiful in meteorites and asteroids. So the Alvarez team was looking at this Cretaceous tertiary boundary, as it was then called, where below were dinosaurs and above there were no dinosaurs, right? So they were trying to figure out how much time had elapsed between, and so they were analyzing this little layer that's only 1 or 2 inches thick. And that's when they discovered that it was like 100 times more iridium in that layer than in the rocks above and below. And they said, well, wait a second, what is this? So they contacted colleagues, I think it was in Denmark, New Zealand, and a couple of other places, said, go back and take a look at the Cretaceous tertiary boundary and see if you see iridium. And every place around the world where they looked at that boundary, there was this iridium spike. So apparently they realized, the whole planet got dusted in iridium. So what could that possibly mean? Well, there must have been an impact of a very iridium-enriched asteroid.
So before you said in the 80s, people thought the dinosaurs gradually, because I went to school post 80s, so I was always told it was a meteorite. I never knew that there was ever another. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, this was, like I said, this was a major turning point in accepting that here you had a well-researched and well-documented potential of a globally catastrophic event. And so now when the paleontologists begin to look in greater detail, the span of time over which the dinosaurs were assumed to have disappeared shrank dramatically. And the more they looked, the narrower that window got. And of course, the smoking gun was always considered to be a crater. And the critics would come out and say, well, if you don't show us a crater, we're not going to believe this scenario because it's too far off of the accepted models of how this stuff happens. Well, eventually, 10 years later, they did discover the crater. In fact, it had actually been discovered in the early 80s by Petroleum Mexico, Pemex, who had drilled down into the northern Yucatan looking for oil. And about a half a mile under limestone, they hit this vitreous layer of this green glass-like material, brought it up, thought that it was volcanic. But somewhere along the line, some American geologists wanted to go take a second look at that. So they started bringing up more samples, and then they realized that was part of the melt rock. That, in other words, from the tremendous heat to this impact, it had melted the rock, and this was this glassy layer. So they then began to do subsurface geophysical surveys of the feature and discovered it's this vast 120 to 150 mile circular astrobleem is the word, astrobleem. There's a cool word you can use in your podcast now. Astrobleem, which literally means
cool name.
Star wound. Star wound. Yeah.
Star wound.
So you got this astrobleed, and it's been studied over and over, since the early 90s, and it's pretty much accepted now that, yeah, it's a gigantic impact scar buried under the limestone rock. And so, but at the same time, on the other side of the planet, there was this extraordinary period of volcanism that created the part of the continent of India, which was produced by these huge basaltic lava flows out onto the surface of the earth. And so there was the conflict then became, was it something from above, outside the earth, an asteroid that did the job, meaning, and the term for that would be exogenic, exo meaning outside, or endogenic, from inside. I think it's both. I think it's clearly both. And I think that the volcanism may have actually been a response to an asteroid the size of Mount Everest slamming into the earth, at basically 10 to 20 times the speed of a high-powered rifle bullet, right? So
fast.
So coming back, this is like 1980. So this is kind of like this pivotal point where it suddenly became more respectable to talk about catastrophes in Earth history. So basically what we see for the next, about a decade and a half is that it's becoming more and more acceptable to think about catastrophes and their role in Earth history, in evolution, in mass extinctions, and so on. Where we're at now, though, and for roughly the last decade, or at least since I think 2007, which was another pivotal year, is the question of what role has catastrophes played in human history. See, and I think that's where it's going now. And the more we look at that, the more it seems like this is a very relevant question to ask. And the realization, 100%. Yeah, totally. And so this is kind of like what brings us back to these ideas of lost civilizations. And you can imagine that if everything that is changing on the planet is so gradual that you barely notice it, one grain of sand, one drop of water at a time, well, whatever it is that causes civilizations to disappear, to collapse, it's not going to be some catastrophic thing from outside. It's going to be factors that are internal to the culture and the civilization itself, right? Or just some kind of vague but built-in senescence that causes the eventual demise of civilizations. However, what we now know is that the Holocene, the last 11,600 years, the geological epoch called the Holocene, has actually had numerous catastrophes, not on the scale of the catastrophe that wiped out the dinosaurs, of course, but certainly of strength and power capable of wiping out civilizations.
And the ancient Egyptians, like, they knew this from like the get-go, and they were telling Solon and everybody, like, we've got recorded history.
There have been,
they were more clued up to it than we are now in the 80s.
Yes. As they told Solon, there have been many destructions of mankind from many causes, but the two primary causes, fire and water.
Okay.
And now in like the thing we've been doing with the tours we're doing out in the Western United States is because some of the imprints of these gigantic floods are just so spectacularly displayed. And it's only within the last few decades that, there's been this acknowledgement that some of these landscapes were in fact carved by floods that are almost on a scale that are almost impossible to visualize because they're so massive.
I'm so impressed that you, as a young boy, could see that, because you didn't have Google Maps. Like, now you can see everything from a satellite and you can see everything that you're explaining. I really thought, Randall, you were going to say that you went up a hill and fell down a pothole and had like an epiphany, but you didn't go that way. That's what I thought you were going for with the pothole thing.
Well, maybe I should change my story then.
Yeah, I fell down a pothole.
I fell in a pothole, yeah. I fell in a pothole.
Full-on Grateful Dead jam, that story that way, though.
Yeah,
but that's a pretty good story.
I like, my like light bulb moment was I found Jimmy from Bright Insight, and he did a video on Atlantis with the Rickhat structure. And that kind of blew my mind. I was like, oh, wait, what? Hold on. And then when I sort of started to Google and look into Atlantis, and obviously I saw you and Graham on Joe Rogan, and sort of that video versus that video and a bit of research. And when I found out that the date of the Younger Dryas comet impact was identical to the one that Plato wrote, I like, that was what convinced me, and I kind of haven't looked back. And that was my literal jump into the rabbit hole. And then I spent the entire lockdown just doing that. Like, there was like 6 months of hardcore YouTubing before I decided to actually go out and see these sites. And I encourage anyone who is like thinking about it, like, I know it's a lot of money to go and see these sites and go on the tours. I appreciate that they're expensive, but go and do it. I'm going to plug your tours, Randall, because they just, it's like a once in a lifetime opportunity to see this stuff.
Yeah. One bit of clarification. Plato's date, 9,000 years prior to Solon, puts us at 11,600, which was the end of the Younger Dryas.
Okay.
Not the beginning, the end of. So the Younger Dryas dates from right around 12,900 to 11,600. Mm-hmm. Now, at 11,600, there was a massive meltwater pulse into the global oceans. It's called meltwater pulse 1b. So in a way, like you, that was for me, that was actually kind of an epiphany for me when I realized that Plato's date and the date of meltwater pulse 1b coincided precisely. And I go, wait a second. So there was a rapid, what geologist John Shaw referred to as a CRE, a catastrophic rise event. So then that was, for me, that was kind of, I think my turning point. I was just kind of a skeptical. My thought was that Atlantis was just a story. I didn't necessarily think there was any literal meaning to it. But then I read a couple of books, late 70s. One was by German physicist Otto Mook, The Secret of Atlantis. And the other one was by R. Cedric Leonard, called The Quest for Atlantis. And they were both coming at it from a relatively Otto Mook was a physicist. So he came, and his theory was, and this came out, was it 78 or 79, right in there. His theory was that there was an asteroid impact that caused massive seismic activity that ultimately sunk Atlantis. So he was proposing that idea pretty much right around the same time as you had these other scientific teams like the Alvarez group and others proposing that the Cretaceous Tertiary 66 million years ago was terminated by an asteroid impact or a comet. They were, at that point, they were not sure which it was, just that there was something from space that took down the Mesozoic, the era of great middle life, right? So he was coming out with that idea, and I read that book right around the same time that I was seeing this information about the KT boundary impact. So I thought, well, interestingly, and then it was in that book that I had actually first heard about the Carolina Bays. And I don't know if you are familiar with the Carolina Bays. I
am, from your work, yes.
Oh, and to this day, yeah, I'm very impressed, Johanna. I'm very impressed. If I was a professor in a university and you were in my classroom, you would have at least a couple of gold stars up on the.
Right. Oh, I got a gold star from Randall Carlson. Yeah. Yes. Winning. Okay. Yes. But Carolina Bays, I'm with you. I can picture, I know what they look like. Yes.
Okay, good. Well, see, to this day, I haven't made up my mind about the Carolina Bays. They're mysterious. Okay. But at that time, Otto Mook proposed that the Carolina Bays were created because an asteroid coming into the atmosphere began to spall, which is the outer layers of it fragmenting off. And it created this swarm of impacts over the southeastern coastal plain of the United States. And that's what created the Carolina Bays. That was his idea back then. So that was the first place I ever heard about the Carolina Bays. So when I was going to this local science library that I mentioned earlier, that was one of the things I was also looking up. I got a hold of a book called The Mysterious Carolina Bays by Henry Savage. And he said in the book, he says, in my list, my bibliography, I'm trying to put every single paper that's ever been written on the Carolina Bays. So just like with Hapgoods, I said, okay, I'm going to have a goal. I'm going to try to get a hold of every single reference he's got and read every single paper on the Carolina Bays. And I pretty much did that. And then I mentioned, I also had this friend of mine that was an astronomer that I had gotten to know by researching there, called the Fernbank Science Center, putting in a plug for the Fernbank Science Center. And he was researching the Eocene-Oligocene boundary, which was an event that occurred. It was a geological boundary that occurred around 35 million years ago. And there was a mass extinction event. And around that time, a geologist by the name of Wiley C. Pogue discovered that Chesapeake Bay, which is right next to Washington, D.C., at the bottom of it is a 50-mile wide astrobleed. And he dated that, and it came up to be about 35 million years old. So it coincided with this extinction episode, right? Well, in Georgia, there are these tektites. Now, do you know what a tektite is?
Not a clue.
Okay, a tektite, if you have an impact, a hypervelocity impact, it completely melts the rock, right? And just as an impact into any liquid would cause a splash effect, and then that splash would fall back. Tektites is the splash that goes up, and it falls back. It comes back as liquid. And as it's falling through the atmosphere, it takes on a variety of aerodynamic shapes. So there are, just south of Macon, Georgia, there's an outcrop, 35 million year old outcrop, and it's on a hill. There's a place called the fall line. And in Georgia, the fall line marks where the transition from the Piedmont, which is the foot slopes of the Appalachian Mountains, to the coastal plain. And over the last few million years, the ocean has come up to the fall line, receded, come up again, and receded. Well, right there in that bank, there's that 35 million year old outcrop. So what happens is when you have a heavy rain, it'll erode that bank, and right at that 35 million year outcrop, tektites will get exposed and lay on the surface. Now, there was undoubtedly billions or trillions. You have to picture over the whole southeastern United States, this stuff is raining down and laying on the land 35 million years ago. Well, now over 35 million years, that's become buried. So there's this one little slice, one little strata that's exposed at this fall line. So I went down there on several tektite hunting trips with the astronomer, who's also a PhD astronomer and PhD geochemist. So I went down there with him on these tektite hunts. Turned out he was interested in Carolina Bays. So we would then go and we would visit Carolina Bays. And eventually I hired a pilot. We flew over, and this was even before I met Brad. And I took photographs of the Georgia Carolina Bays from the air, did a lot of study in that. Thought I had it figured out, but I'm not convinced anymore because there's a lot of different evidence that's coming together, but there's still a mysterious phenomena. So a lot of this stuff was coming together in the early 80s and in the 80s. And so that's kind of where I kind of walked into the whole thing. I think Brad and I did our first serious field trip in 1998. Because the other book that I read on Atlantis around the late 70s, besides the one from Otto Mook, was this one by R. Cedric Leonard. And in that book, he had a chapter called The Cataclysm of 10,000 BC. And in that chapter, he talked about the Scablands of Eastern Washington. And when I read that, I go, okay, I sort of remember that because coming back late summer, early fall of 1970, me and my buddy are coming across the Cascades, and we drove across Eastern Washington, and we drove through the Scablands. I wasn't nearly as impressed by what I saw then, of course, because I wasn't seeing the really magnificent stuff. But I did remember the Scablands. Yeah, I've been to the Scablands, drove across the Scablands. So he's talking about J. Harlan Brett's and these tremendous, gigantic floods. So I think that was the point. And this is, again, maybe early, maybe 90, 91, right in there somewhere. Well, so then I got really interested in the Scablands, and this is how I do things. You know, I set out, okay, I began to look into bibliographies, and there was, dozens and dozens of papers written since the early 1920s. So I set about collecting all of those together, reading everything I could find on the Scablands. And then when I met Brad, which was about 96, I believe.
Yep.
I think I was doing a presentation. Was that the one where John Anthony West was at? I think it was, wasn't it?
I think it was.
I think that's where I met John.
That
yeah.
was late 96.
Yeah, about late 96. So instantly, Brad and I hit it off because Brad was very interested in the same kind of stuff. So by 2 years later, we'd become good friends, and we decided we were going to do this first expedition together to Eastern Washington. So me and Brad and a couple of friends, we went out there and spent a couple of weeks. The next summer, we went to British Columbia because I had concluded that the explanation for these giant floods was not correct. And I wanted to find evidence that would support or bolster this idea that the conventional explanations that were now being accepted by the geological community were not correct.
And are they accepted now, like properly? Like, is the theories, like, how close are we to it being?
Well, the existence of the floods is accepted. And because once you spend a week or two in those landscapes with even just a smattering of hydrological knowledge and stratigraphy and that kind of thing, it's just obvious. There's just no way around it. You're seeing, and what it is, it's you have this suite of features that each time you add one more element, whether it was a pothole or whether it was a slot canyon or whether it was a recessional cataract or whether it was a giant boulder bar or any, the list goes on of the features that are produced by giant floods, right? Well, you could take one of them and say, okay, you could come up with maybe a sort of a quasi accurate explanation of what might cause it. But it's when you put the suite of these features together, every time you add a new type of feature to the mix, it becomes more and more impossible to explain it by some kind of a gradualistic process. So the geological community accepts that there were these giant floods. But their theory is that there was a giant lake held in by an ice dam in western Montana. The ice dam was a half a mile thick. The lake was 2,100 feet deep at the ice dam. The ice dam gave way. The lake drained out. Then the ice dam grew back and the lake formed again, burst through the ice dam, and it did this repeatedly. Now, this model is based upon the observation of modern glacial outburst floods that are seen Iceland, British Columbia, the Himalayas, anywhere where there's mountain glaciers. And particularly within the last century or two, there have been a lot of those because the planet has been coming out of this 500-year-long period of cold called the Little Ice Age. You ever heard the term the Little Ice Age?
Yes.
Okay, good. The Little Ice Age was a period of time where the glaciers worldwide grew to probably the largest extent they had been in 10,000 years since the end of the Great Ice Age. When those glaciers began to shrink back, you had a lot of lakes that formed in the valleys. They're called proglacial lakes if they're in front of the lake, in front of the glacier. And you had a lot of these lakes that formed, and then they would eventually fill up to the point where the pressure got great enough that it was able to burst through the containing glacier and drain out. There are a lot of these. The term that's often used now is from Iceland called Jökulhlaups. A Jökulhlaups is this outburst flood. And the problem, though, is, and so what the geological community does, that within the framework of uniformitarian thinking, that the basic working premise is that we look for things that are happening today that we can witness firsthand and extrapolate backwards to, thousands or 100,000s or even millions of years ago. And the idea is to explain things that we see that were formed in the past by analogs with the present. And so one of the things that helped the geological community, who was very resistant to this idea of mega floods, because, oh God, we're getting back to biblical literalism. And the next thing you know, somebody will be talking about Noah's flood, right? So they were very resistant, right? But then when they saw the possibility of this uniformitarian principle, which, oh, hey, we've got modern outburst floods. It's just one of those, only bigger, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is even the biggest of these modern outburst floods are not even 1,000. We've got some serious.
Yeah, Laura,
We got some serious.
Laura, you might need to mute yourself there.
Laura,
What I do?
what have you done, Laura?
You got to mute yourself, Laura. Mute yourself.
Thank you.
It's all right.
Sorry,
It's just
Laura.
live. Don't worry
Silence.
about it. We're just live to everybody in the world. No pressure.
It's okay. Well, and I don't want to dominate this conversation, which I've been doing up to this point, but that's kind of pretty much how it has progressed. Now, since 98, God, how many trips have we done now, including all of them, up to 40 or 50 or something
Yeah, we're 40 plus at this point.
Yeah,
Happy to say, yeah, like she said, grateful. Yeah, these things cost money, but things have fallen into place to allow us to do these things and
That's amazing.
get that research done. Yeah.
I
It's
had a
amazing
question.
country.
I had a
Please.
question. So just going back to a little bit back to Atlantis and how, because people weren't really fascinated by it. It's quite like a recent, in the last sort of 150 years that people are really fascinated with Atlantis. When did people start or stop looking for Atlantis around the kind of Straits of Gibraltar? And when did they start looking elsewhere in the world? Was that around that 70s mark where everybody was doing?
yes, because what you had really, it was kind of an outgrowth of continental drift and plate tectonics theory that
Right, yeah.
was actually proposed in the early 20th century, but not accepted until the 1960s and 1970s, and it became part of the geological dogma. And pretty much, I have no reason to question the basic premises of plate tectonic theory or continental drift. But that was when a group of geologists, and coming out of the 60s, that whole period of time, that's when New Age thinking really started, going to another level. And, you had,
I remember.
yeah, I'm sure you do. You were there. I know you were there.
I remember.
You were there in
What
1960.
a decade.
Yeah, it was quite a decade. Yes, it was. But there was just this flurry of thinking that was like completely outside. If you go back between the 50s and the late 60s, it's like two different worlds almost. And so what happened was, I think that there was a lot of, there was this, well, you remember the song Atlantis by Donovan? Way down below the ocean, where
No.
blah, blah. You don't remember that? You could sing.
Beyond the
You
sea.
could,
I know that one.
Beyond the Sea. Yeah, sorry.
Way down.
below the ocean, something like that. It was a very popular song.
Everybody, sing the
19
chorus. That
Come
old
on.
banger.
You don't know that, Brad?
Not at all.
Of course
Really?
he does. He's just shy. He's shy.
I
Yeah,
read
we're
the
doing a
lyrics one
cover of
time.
it at the next Scablands.
I'm trying to pull up the lyrics here.
Yeah, pull up the lyrics. It's actually I'm just citing that as an example. It was a very popular song. Donovan,
Yeah.
you know Donovan? He was the Scottish folk singer, very popular in the 60s, 70s, kind of considered to be the UK's counterpart to Bob Dylan.
Oh, okay. No, that's embarrassing. I don't know that, but yeah, I know Bob
Ooh.
Dylan.
It's like Mellow Yellow.
Mellow Yellow, yes. Now, Laura, how do you
What's
know
the
that?
other
You
one?
weren't a
Season of the Witch.
Season of the
Oh
Witch.
no, I know that one. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
got a reference.
That was Donovan.
Okay.
I had a Donovan phase.
Did you really?
Oh yeah.
Okay. How about that? So, how
In
does somebody like
college.
you discover?
I was listening to Die. I went to art school and we do all kinds of
Okay.
weird stuff.
That makes sense.
So, yeah. Anyways, he did this song Atlantis, Very popular. And I'm just citing that as an example. I mean, it was the late 60s, early 70s. So many of these things that were kind of outside the mainstream suddenly became popular.
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
there was a lot of talk about Atlantis and speculation about Atlantis. And so I think then that the scholars, the serious scholars and geologists and scientists and stuff felt that they had a duty to come out and try to, lay to rest some of this pseudoscience that seemed to be, occupying so much of people's attention. So
Yeah.
in 1978, there was a book that came out called Atlantis, Fact or Fiction. And I did actually read that about that time or shortly thereafter. And we could actually, let's see here.
You quote a lot of that book in the videos that I've watched.
Yes.
And you talk about how they jumped the gun a bit, didn't they? They categorically said Atlantis couldn't be physically possible, but you kind of
that's right. That's exactly right. So in the and it was Dorothy B. Vitaliano, who was a distinguished geologist at the time. She was the one who actually coined the term geomythology. And she was very open to a lot of stuff, but when it came to Atlantis, in this book, in her chapter was entitled Atlantis from the Geologic Point of View. 1978, this is a quote from her. Inasmuch as all references to Atlantis stem from Plato and no other source, which is not entirely true, but almost true, in deciding whether it is fact or fiction, or to put it another way, whether it is legend or myth, we are faced with three options. Number one, we can take everything Plato says quite literally. Two, we can take his words seriously, but not literally. Or three, we can take Atlantis as purely and simply his invention. And so what she then does is goes back to the 1982 book authored by Ignatius Donnelly, who was a congressman from my home state, who as I understand it, ran for Congress just so that he could get to Washington and have access to the Library of Congress. So he spent all of his time. 1882. Yeah, 1882. Did I say 1982?
Yeah, I was like,
okay.
Whoa. I found a copy of that in a charity shop, but it was like one of the, not on a first edition, but it was like a really old edition of, so I bought that straight away.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear you say that. So you have one of the older, was it a hardback?
It's a old hardback. I think it was like it's like an 1890 something. It's an old book, but it's not one of the first editions. But
I bet it's worth money though.
Well, that's why I grabbed it.
And especially after people see this podcast, it'll probably double or triple in price.
Exactly. If anyone would like to purchase that book, then they can go to my YouTube channel. No, I'm joking. I am keeping that book for as long as I live.
So so she goes back to Ignatius Donnelly's 1880. Now there was earlier stuff than that. Athanasius Kircher, he wrote about Atlantis and others. And it was quite interesting of value and importance to Arabs and to the Arab traditions who took it literally. But so in 1882, Donnelly publishes this book in which he argues that there really wasn't Atlantis. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, in that book, which was again, I read that about that time, late 70s. In that book, he theorizes that it was a comet impact that caused the destruction of Atlantis. So he was, I think, in some ways, really quite ahead of his time. But so Dorothy Vitaliano, she goes back and references Donnelly's book. She says, since that book is still being sold in bookstores everywhere and has provided the basis for numerous other works, it is desirable to explain why his literal interpretation of Plato's description is utterly inconsistent with modern scientific knowledge. Donnelly outlined 13 propositions in support of which he then proceeded to marshal all kinds of evidence. But only 2 of these propositions are relevant to a geologically oriented discussion. And here's his 2 propositions. Number 1, there once existed in the Atlantic Ocean, opposite the mouth of the Mediterranean Sea, a large island, which was the remnant of an Atlantic continent and known to the ancient world as Atlantis. Proposition 2, that Atlantis perished in a terrible convulsion of nature in which the whole island sunk into the ocean with nearly all its inhabitants. So then she goes on to say, in light of what is known today about the ocean floors, we can definitely rule out the possibility of a sunken landmass of any substantial size in the Atlantic, or for that matter, in any other ocean basin. Nowhere in the ocean basins is there any sign of a large mass of continental type crust, which could represent a submerged continent. I would have to comment.
Has she been
right
down there? How does she know that for sure? Like, she's being very strongly worded there for a woman
Yes,
who's not
and
been
now
to the bottom of it.
this is 1978, right? Now, if we jump ahead, this is from the NOAA's site, the National Atmospheric and Oceanic Administration, a few years ago. And this is what their site says. And these are guys who've, really studied the ocean and the ocean floors, right? So here's direct quote from their website. Like the rest of the deep ocean floor, we have explored less of the mountains of the mid-ocean ridge system than the surface of Venus or Mars or the dark side of the moon. Use of submersible or remotely operated vehicles to explore the mid-ocean ridge has provided information on less than 0.1% of the mid-ocean ridge. Much of the mid-ocean ridge still remains a mystery. Now, this is 30 years after Vitaliano made her basically sweeping dismissal, right?
She looks stupid now. I'm just going to say it.
I don't want to be too hard on her because she did some cool stuff. She was a cool lady. But when it came to this, she pretty much stuck to the mainstream view. Mm-hmm. I'm surprised, though, that even by 78, there was already in the 10-hour stuff, I quote a lot of that stuff from prior to 1978 that is showing that there were subsided land masses on the bottom of the ocean.
It's all the trips that were in like the 40s, 50s, 60s. That's where they find all this evidence. And I was a little bit like, she never rebuted all of those facts that you put forward. So yeah, it seemed a bit confusing.
Yeah.
Like, she didn't answer all of the evidence that you found. Your work is amazing. So when I'm having conversations with people about Atlantis and we're getting down to the argument of whether or not it could be possible or impossible, you put forward such great arguments. But there's one area that I get stuck on when people say the quote about Atlantis being the same size as Asia and Libya. And I don't know how to answer that one. So if you could help me with my, what do you interpret that as being in the text?
Okay, well, a couple of ways. Number one, I'm not saying that Plato's account was literally correct in every detail. Mm-hmm. But also, it's important to realize that, we have to ask, well, what framework are we, what is the geographical framework that, Libya was pretty much northern Africa to the west of Egypt. That was Libya, right? Europe, I mean, in Plato's time, how much of that was associated with the full extent of Europe as we imagine it today? But let me pull something up here because Plato's account makes it clear that it wasn't a single island. In fact, the thing that I'm saying is that we have to look at the whole complex of Macaronesia, which includes the Azores, Madeira, and the Canaries, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if I go to, let's see, if I go to Polynesia, let me just see this. We'll try this for once. Polynesia, which, is the Pacific Island group, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm pulling up here Polynesia. Polynesia is a subregion of Oceania made up of more than 1,000 islands scattered over the central and southern Pacific Ocean. Let's see if it actually gives us the geographical area. Let's see here. So Polynesia covers 270,000 square kilometers. So now if we are talking about Oh, what's the area of Polynesia? Well, is it the area of the individual islands, or is it really the area of the whole complex? So when we say 270,000 square kilometers, we're talking about the whole complex of Polynesia, because it encompasses the oceanic areas in amongst the islands. To me, if there's any explanation besides just, hyperbole that you would expect to find in an account like that, we have to look at the whole area of Macaronesia, and not just the area of one single island. Now, right behind Brad there, you can't see it because of Brad's shoulder.
Just move out the way, Brad. There we are. You're in the way. There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
There we go. Okay, so this is the Azores Plateau right here.
Yep.
And the data suggests that, and particularly again, the point that I stressed is it's at that it straddles a triple plate junction, which is a place where one would expect that there could be massive vertical movements due to the glacial unloading. And in the 6 hours that I'm going to be doing live this Thursday and then again on the February 20th, I'm going to get into all of that. So I won't get into it in that depth.
We'll save the goods for Thursday. But okay. That makes a lot of sense, because I say that as well. Like most people don't know that Atlantis was part of a kingdom of like 10 kingdoms, that it says that had continents, peninsulas. Like people just think it's this one like magical little island. Yeah. So it makes sense that he was talking about potentially all the kingdoms were bigger than like Libya. And of course, Libya was just North Africa, and Asia could have been just Turkey, like Asia Minor.
Yeah. We don't really know, but I mean, that to me is not a deal killer, because there's a potential explanation for that. And, even if that explanation is not correct, which I tend to think that, if you look at, again, Plato's account, you'll see that he does definitely refer to there being multiple islands.
Well, even if it went down into the Caribbean and Cuba, then that would expand it really greatly. You could put some really big numbers on that and compare it to a landmass.
Yeah, and Plato does make the point. Yeah, here's the quote from Plato. Now, in this island of Atlantis, there was a great and wonderful empire which had rule over the whole island and others, and over parts of the continent. And furthermore, the men of Atlantis had subjected the parts of Libya within the column of Heracles as far as Egypt, and of Europe as far as Tyrrhenia. So right there, that's like one of the references that talks about the empire. So if you look at it as from that perspective, yes, within the whole complex of the multiple islands that made up the core of the Atlantean Empire, and then you look at the outlying, whatever you want to call it, the colonies. You come up with a tremendously vast area. Now, if you look at the Azores Plateau, it's just close to the size of Iceland. I'm not sure what the area of Iceland is. I've looked it up.
It's 330 kilometers, I think. Is it 550? Oh, I might have shot myself in the foot there. I'm going to say
across.
Or that might,
width, are you saying? Not square kilometers, but width.
It was something super similar to, it was like of a similar size to what Plato was saying that Atlantis was.
Yeah, I can tell you here in a second here, Iceland.
Let's see, I might lose my gold star.
No, you're safe for the moment. Okay. Just under 40,000 square miles.
Oh, okay. Maybe Iceland's a lot smaller then.
Just under 40,000 square miles. But if you do 40,000 and I take the square root of that, it's 200 miles.
200 miles.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're in the ballpark.
300. Okay.
Well,
yeah, kilometers. Yeah, you're
close. Kilometers. Yes, 300. So no, you don't. I don't have to take away your gold star yet.
Oh, thank God! Great. Okay. Great.
So.
You said yes.
No, in fact, actually, that's about right. 300 kilometers, 200 miles. Yeah. So
bang on. Shouldn't have doubted myself.
Opposed to Johanna. But we're thinking next year, if everything is opened up, we're thinking about a tour to Micronesia. I've had contact from a number of people that live in the Azores. They speak Portuguese there. But yeah, it's quite a place. Perpetual.
I want to go.
I know, I do too.
We'll take a bucket and a spade and we'll see what we can find. And
well, the other thing I'm working on, and this is the down. So anybody listening, don't even talk about this, but there has been, I've been contacted by somebody who actually is good friends with, what was his name again? I've forgotten. But yeah, we have connections to potentially a submersible. Potentially.
I'll come.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Bring my camera.
To me, I would just like jump at that with one hesitation. I'm claustrophobic.
Me too. I realized that when I got to I really realized it when I went to Egypt and I suddenly had to go down a pyramid, and literally the only way into a pyramid is by a 3 foot by 3 foot tunnel that goes like 100 foot underground.
Yes.
I had to face my fear, and I was sweating. It was very uncomfortable. And also you're right up against someone's butt as well, because there's like a bunch of you going in. So that's always something that I didn't realize about ancient Egypt. You're going to be nice and squished with butts and claustrophobic.
Yeah.
So I don't know how well I deal with being in. I might have to take a Valium or something to get me down there. But
I would have to face my fears too, because I think it would be worth it.
It'd be worth it.
Yeah. So
like the opening of Titanic.
Yeah. Well, so what it boils down to in part 2 of the presentation, I'm going to get into more of like the first part's going to be, we're going to start analyzing, Plato's account, and we're going to be looking at the evidence for these geomorphic changes and geological changes. The two terms, which, at some point you will be quizzed, Johanna, but isostasy. Say it a couple of times.
Isostasy.
That's the vertical movement of the Earth's crust.
Okay, the isostasy. And astrobleem, I remember that one.
Astrobleem.
Bleem, that's what I said. Randall, that's what I said.
Okay.
It's the microphone. Sorry, it's the microphone.
Like
astrobleem.
A blemish.
Yeah, like a blemish.
Astrobleem.
Right.
And isostasy. I'm going to sound so clever after today. Okay, isostasy.
Well, here's one more that goes right along with isostasy is eustasy. Well, now we're talking about eustatic. There's isostatic adjustment of the landmass, and then there's eustatic changes in the oceans. Eustatic has to do with the ocean water going down as glaciers grow on land, and as glaciers on land melt away, ocean level comes up. That's the eustatic rise and fall of sea level, which corresponds to the growth and shrinkage of the great ice sheets.
Got it. Yes, I remember that from the references that you were putting in your work about how the plates go up and down when there's a melt water goes in, and it made a lot of sense. And now I know the word. Okay.
Yeah. In fact, I might
Randall, let me do the promoter role here while you're looking for something. If people are showing up and not really knowing what they've gotten in the middle of, Randall Carlson is doing a live stream on PLATO'S Atlantis, back to the source, starting this Thursday night at 9 p.m. So we'll have links on how to get into that. If you haven't seen the previous videos that have come out or the social media posts, that's starting this Thursday, and then we'll follow up with part 2 on February 20th, which is a Sunday night, again, 9 p.m. Eastern. But those will be available. You've got to start a free HowTube account, and then those videos will be have a home there, and you can watch them again and again as much as you want. You don't have to be there for the live show. That's a big question that many people are having. So if you want to do it one at a time, it's $18. If you want to do both of them, buy them up front, it's $33, save a couple bucks. and know that you're going to get to see it when it happens and have it stored in your new free how-to account.
And what I'm suggesting is folks get together and have Atlantis parties if you want to everybody kick in a few bucks.
Sure.
Great idea.
Sure.
Wouldn't that be fun?
Have a watch party.
Yeah, we're gonna come up with a drinking game.
Perfect. I'm dressing as Plato.
I can't wait to see that.
I'll
that would be worth the price of admission.
Just making a toga.
More stars.
Yes. Great. Okay. Well,
there's also a raffle for free. You get your you get the chance to get your ticket price back, and then we're doing a whole Carlson prize pack if you sign up before the end of day on Wednesday. So if you sign up before the day of the event, we're doing a raffle. So
wait. What is this Carlson prize pack?
Hashtag Carlson.
Well, what is this Carlson prize pack? What is this now? What have you got me into?
Yeah, it's already too
what
late.
Am I? So what I have to
don't worry about it.
Okay.
You'll be in the toga.
Yeah, you have to wear the toga, Randall, for the whole thing. And and the prize thing is that people
and then
get
the big reveal of the winner.
Okay. Oh, I have dinner with the winner.
Yes.
Dinner with the winner.
Dinner with the winner, but over Zoom, obviously. So,
Okay.
Distance.
Oh, I see. I was just saying, it's got to be seafood, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Fish and chips.
There we go. Perfect.
Randall Carlson.
Perfect. With Randall in a toga.
Perfect.
I don't know if I might have looked good in a toga once upon a time, but so I want to show you, I'm going to actually do a share screen here.
Oh.
And this is along Hudson Bay. Now, you know what this is? These are shorelines, right? So now these are shorelines from the isostatic rising of the land around Hudson Bay. Look at this. So you can see here's the bay. And as you go up, you can actually see that as you go up, and this is like 1,000 feet above sea level, the highest shorelines, and it's not done yet. But what you see is that as you get closer to sea level, the distance between the successive shorelines is getting wider because the isostatic rise is slowing down from when it was first deglaciated. Okay. But you can see, again, these are shorelines here. And this is from the rise of the land. This is your isostatic rise. And so all of this area here was buried under like 1.5 miles of ice. So that 1.5 miles of ice is so heavy, it just compresses the ground, maybe up to as much as 2,000 feet. Now, when the ice is removed, the land begins to rebound back. And now the analogy I use is like, are you sitting right now on a chair with a cushion on it? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So isostatic depression of the seat of the chair while you're sitting on it. And if you stand up, will the depression formed by your derriere?
You get butt marks in the chair.
Yeah. That's isostatic depression.
Great.
So, and then when you stand up, the cushion rises back out, and that is isostatic rise, isostatic compensation. Compensation is just moving, according to the weight. And it really is surprising. It doesn't, in terms of the size of the planet, it doesn't really take that much weight itself. But so now all of that weight, most of the Laurentide ice sheet, which is the great eastern ice sheet that was as big as the one now covering the South Pole, almost all of that water, when it melted, went back into the North Atlantic. So you have this rapid, geologically speaking, rapid rise of sea level. Theoretically, there has to be a response. As here is rising, this is going to go down. And it's like this, you see. So when
it's like being on a waterbed with someone.
Yes,
someone
exactly.
Gets in and you're like, whoa. Yeah. Okay. I can visualize it now.
Yes. Okay. So I guess I thought do they still have water beds?
I don't think so, but I remember being on one as a kid and thinking it was the best thing ever.
All right. Yeah.
But that makes sense. When someone gets in a waterbed, it goes up and down, and someone like gets out, you'll
exactly.
You'll rise up.
And so if you get in one side of the waterbed and the weight goes down, it pushes the water laterally, which causes the other side to go up when you get out. So that's a perfect example, Johanna. I'm going to have to give you another star.
Yes.
Yeah. You're racking them
Come on,
up.
Brad. You got to get
You're racking them up. Oh, Brad's going to have, we're going to soon have like a military
my book
coat for Brad with all of his medals and honors and things that he's earned over the years.
I do have a question about this then. So say we were running with the theory that Atlantis was one of the islands around the Azores plateau, and the sea level was 400 foot lower back then.
Lower. Yeah.
And then in theory, when the melt pulse water came in and everything rose for 400 foot, but also there would be that movement on top of that 400, you would also be getting that weird platonic movement.
Right. So the sea level is the eustatic rise of sea level is accompanied with the isostatic depression of the ocean floor.
Mm-hmm.
So together, those two sea levels 400 feet, which means that it's going to roughly double the size of those islands. But if you have subsidence of up to, in fact, some of the empirical data suggests subsidence in some of the areas up to 2,500 feet. So you're basically looking at up to 3,000 feet change in difference between when you add in the eustatic rise of sea level and the isostatic depression of the ocean floor, perhaps a differential of up to close to 3,000 feet.
And
so
isn't
if you
the
do
bottom
that,
of it 3,000 feet?
Well, the bottom, 2,500 feet.
So it's within the parameter of, okay.
So
that's
cool.
Cool.
And here's the thing: you don't have to go to crystal ray guns and flying spaceships or any of that kind of stuff.
Mm-mm.
When you're talking about Atlantis. If we go back to what Plato's talking about, he's basically talking about a highly sophisticated maritime culture, perhaps something along the lines of the Minoans or the Phoenicians, but raised by an order of magnitude. Now, where he does get into, something that sounds like an extraordinarily organized civilization anyway, is when he starts describing the infrastructure that they created, right? Which would have truly been extraordinary. And I am going to get into that in the live streams that we do. But really, when we look at the ancient world, what do we see over and over again? Mind-blowing engineering and building capabilities.
Yeah.
Whether it's Egypt, whether it's South America, the ability to move these massive 50, 100, 200-ton stones all over the world, all over the ancient world. I mean, as a builder, that's one of the things that has really been driven home to me, is because, even just if you got to put a beam in place that weighs 1 ton, unless you have large mechanical cranes and stuff, it's a challenging task. When you think about moving stones and transporting, and you guys went to Aswan, right, where the big unfinished obelisk is?
Yeah, I stood on it and got told off. Yeah,
I
remember.
Right. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about, right? So I mean, the fact that there may have been extraordinary capabilities in the prehistoric ancient world, to me, is not such a huge stretch as some people might imagine it to be, because we do see at the dawn of civilization all over the world, people doing things that completely out of the range and scale of what we'd ordinarily think that hunter-gatherers, migrant societies, subsistence farmers, why would they be interested in moving 100-ton stone? There's no real practical reason for that. If you're a subsistence farmer.
At Aswan, when I went to see it, it's not just the fact that it's like over 1,000-ton stone. I was stood and I did a little look around, and it was the terrain that they would have had to have moved it over as well. That was equally as impressive, because it was like, it's not flat. There was uphill, there was inclines. Right. And I was like, even if you did manage to lift that out with some kind of crane, how are you transporting it over and down this rocky, hazardous, you had to watch your foot just walking as a human, let alone carrying anything. I was like, it was blowing my mind how they would even move something across rocky terrain. And I only noticed that from being on the ground because I was looking around. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's a mystery. And I think there's some ideas out there that may be in the right direction. And I almost have to conclude it was not brute force, because, it'd be one thing to say, okay, there was one really, idiosyncratic culture that for whatever reason felt it necessary to move very large stones around. But when you find it all over the world, it just doesn't seem to add up, and what it strikes me is that there had to have been a technological solution that we've lost, that we forgot. And to me, why is that so pseudoscientific that we are allowed to even think that? Well, again, it's only because of these entrenched dogmatic models about what supposedly our ancestors were capable or not of in prehistoric times. But I mean, every year new stuff is coming to light that I think is forcing us to reevaluate that lost, what I refer to as the deep history of the human species. It goes back probably a couple of 100,000 years, if not longer, that our modern ancestors have been on this planet. I mean, we're finding skeletal remains that are 150, 180,000 years old that we can't really even differentiate between, something that old and a modern skeleton. So my thought is, when you start thinking about it, okay, well, for all of those generations, hundreds of generations, nobody came up with, there was no accumulated learning that was passed on and passed down. And it was just, generation after generation, they were just stuck in this stagnant level where nobody went beyond, hunting and gathering. And then
all of a sudden, everywhere in the world kind of just had a realization of oh wow, we should build stuff. This
is getting kind of boring here, let's do something. Hey, this is getting boring, going after this small game and gathering berries and roots. Let's go quarry some 100-ton stones.
Randall, you're going to have your work cut out, because I've heard that Disney are remaking their cartoon Atlantis, but they're doing a real life action version. And as much as I love Disney Atlantis, it's only going to fuel that whole pseudoscience side of it. It's hard to get people to, with the minute you say Atlantis, people go, oh, flying cars and crystals. And I'm like, no, it doesn't say that anywhere in Plato's work. No, that's Disney. But unfortunately, Disney are gonna put that into the minds of many.
And see, I kind of scripted out my whole idea years ago for what I thought a $200 million Hollywood blockbuster treatment of Atlantis should be.
Oh, okay. I'm interested to hear that.
Oh, so, well,
Randall, let me be time guy here. We're about to have 10 minutes or less left.
Oh,
so kind of in that vein though, can you clarify, historically Plato is the only source, or 98% of what we know going way back is Plato. There's a couple other people, but everything else, you're getting into the flying cars and the crystals, all that stuff is recent and probably channeling. And I know a lot of it came from Edgar Casey, and there's some merit to what he was able to do medically and see these past lives and stuff. But that's not what you're talking about. This comes from Plato, and that's why you're focusing on this in this upcoming lecture.
That's why I'm calling it Plato's Atlantis, back to the source, because I want to take it and see. This is what you brought up earlier, Johanna, was this idea that post 1970s, when the geologists declared that Atlantis was just merely fiction. And I should have actually finished with that quote where she says, going back to Dorothy Vitaliano, this is what she says in conclusion to her discussion of Atlantis. Let me just roll back here. So you should be right about here. Let's see. Here we go. Okay. She says that, you remember the three options? We take everything Plato says literally. We take it seriously, but not literally, or we just conclude it's all fiction. So what she did was she settled on the third option. She says, with an Atlantic site ruled out as physically impossible, all arguments based on racial, linguistic, or other cultural similarities on both sides of the ocean, which is true. And this is what a lot of the Atlantean researchers have documented, is that there is racial, linguistic, cultural similarities, botanical, all these really interesting correlations on both sides of the ocean. And then she says, which would include the rest of Donnelly's 13 propositions, must collapse. So in other words, by saying that all of the 11 propositions that aren't geologically based totally depend for their viability on the 2 geologically based propositions, if we eliminate those, well, we don't even need to address any of the others. We can just eliminate them. So she says either they are not real similarities at all, because they are similarities, right? Either they are not real similarities, or they must be explained in other ways, including mere coincidence. Having considered the various possibilities, let us return to the original question. Is Atlantis myth or legend? I have tried to show that an Atlantic site, and with it a literal interpretation of Plato's description, is ruled out by our present knowledge of the sea floors. The very best we can do is to grant that Plato might have derived some of his ideas from Minoan Crete in one way or another, but such a derivation is far too roundabout for Atlantis to qualify as a legend, which presents a distorted view of an actual event. So, in conclusion, she says, from the geological point of view, I fear that Atlantis must be considered just another of the myths of Plato. So, what we see after that that position taken by the geological community, at that point is when you begin to see this diversion in research, looking at all of these other places away from where Plato was clearly putting it.
Like, right? Oh, it's in Antarctica or whatever.
Antarctica, or it's in the UK, the Celtic Shelf. Doggerland has been proposed. And I know you know about Doggerland because you did a video about it.
I did. Oh, gold star for you, Randall.
Well, thank you, Johanna. So, Antarctica, Cuba, Bahamas, a lot, Turkey, and of course now Mauritania with Jimmy. And by the way, I think Jimmy's a great guy, and I like him, even though I've never met him. But on this one, we're going to have to disagree. I don't think it was the recat structure for multiple reasons, which I go into in episode 9.
You convinced me otherwise. I was team recat structure until I really looked at your work, and then I was like, no. I agree with you.
Mm-hmm. So we still, I guess we'll get Jimmy on the Atlantis tour, and he can go down in the submersible with us if we find those remnants, that we need to find to convince the skeptics, right? So anyways, what happened? Dispersing to all of these other places, and every single one of them has one thing in common. They have to alter Plato's details. So what I'm doing is I'm circling back to option number 1. What happens if we just take Plato at face value? We take his details literally. How well do they hold up? That was my attitude going into this. And the more I got into it, the more I saw, and the first thing that really was like an epiphany for me, when I saw the onset of the Holocene dated to the exact end of the Younger Dryas, to the exact meltwater pulse 1b, and there it was right on the money, Plato's date for the destruction of Atlantis.
That's what I would say to that lady who said that there's nothing. I was like, well, okay, on the flip side, what is the mathematical probability that Plato invented a story, just pulled it out of his brain, and he invented the time that it happened and the place, and he happened to just accidentally point to the place in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, which is the most vulnerable place possibly on that side of the world, like tectonically, and also he got the date right. And I'm like, what's the mathematical probability that was a guess? And so for me, I sway. I'm like, nah, it's too much of a coincidence that he got it at the right time. I think if all of us just picked a place and a time for a catastrophic event to sink an island, we'd never get the coordinates right or the date right.
And the thing about, to give credit to Dorothy Vitaliano, I mean, she was already at the end of her career when she wrote this. She had been coming up, with, she came up within this milieu of strict gradualism, when she started her career, plate tectonics wasn't even a thing. Right. So,
right.
And so catastrophism, we're right at that point. Like I said, that kind of that hinge point, early 1980s, where suddenly it became acceptable to talk about catastrophes in Earth history. So this book came out really just before that. Right.
If only she had YouTube.
Yeah. She didn't have
had
YouTube.
A different perspective.
I don't think she passed away until the 2000s, but yeah. So, I still, admire her. Again, she gave us the term geomythology because she was willing to consider that mythology contained useful, valuable, viable information that we could use to better understand our own geological past. Mm-hmm. So that was significant. And geomythology really has sort of emerged. The work of Bruce Massey has really moved it forward. The idea that, there is useful information in these ancient traditions, the myths, the legends, the folklore, all of that kind of stuff that really does point to, and if we had more time, we could get into all kinds of interesting stuff about, cosmic impacts and, fiery serpents in the sky and, all kinds of things. But I think, what happens is when Bradley puts his hat on, that's the signal.
He forgot his hat. I think he's forgetting the hat. There it goes.
Here it is.
Yeah.
Oh man, we'll just have to have another Monday night class.
I would love to.
At the School of Randall.
Yeah. So you guys want to talk again about the upcoming stuff? You got the Atlantis seminars coming up. We've got people have been asking about the next Cumberland tour. Can they buy tickets yet?
I think the page for that's going up within the next couple of days.
Okay, so it's not there yet. Yeah. So anybody who asked about that,
correct.
Yeah,
it's going to be in March. The tour and Cumberland Plateau is. Most people don't know much about the Cumberland Plateau and don't realize how interesting it is geologically. So I'm trying to rectify that oversight and show how incredible it really is. And one of the things that I've been doing, Johanna, is to try to put it in a some kind of conceptual framework that we can actually understand is simply this: is that for 12,000 years now, there has been in the surface of the earth, engraved into the surface of the earth, this epic tale, right? And it goes back, the Younger Dryas is kind of like it's kind of like the veil that separates the modern epoch of history from deep history, the lost history of the human species on planet Earth. And to me, the challenge is to recognize that there is this veil. And so when you have the orthodox thinkers being dismissive of anything possibly other than hunter-gatherers back, in prehistoric times, what they're doing is they're basically failing to penetrate that veil and realize that there are tens of thousands of years of lost history, that things were happening. And given that, we look at our modern, humans, the kind of the curiosity that we have and the fact that we can see multiple kind of aborted efforts to create civilization. That's what the Holocene basically is. 8,000, 9,000 years of attempts to create civilization, and then something happens and they're interrupted. We could talk about the Bronze Age collapse, for example, which is a perfect example where you had a simultaneous widespread collapse of cultures all around the Mediterranean, which is now being attributed to probably a series of natural disasters, right? But so this is the changing paradigm. And what I'm trying to say is, okay, the key to understanding this is the story with all of its incredible epic detail is there. It's been waiting for us for 12,000 years. And until now, even when I was a young man coming into these kinds of things and interests, we could not perceive that story that's engraved into the earth. But now we've got, it started with maybe aerial photography and then satellite photography and ground penetrating radar, core samples from the ocean bottoms, LIDAR, all the mapping of the planet. We're now in a position where the whole story is now arrayed. The problem is nobody knows how to read the script. Even pedigreed geologists are only just on the forefront of reading a pedigreed script. And what's held them back, again, is this straitjacket of gradualistic thinking. But I think we're seeing that there's a whole new generation of earth scientists who are now open to this idea that, catastrophes have played a critical role, not only in the history of life on Earth, but in the history of human civilization. So if you ask me what I think to basically define this work that I'm trying to do, it's like to teach people how to read the script, how to read to understand the grammar, to understand the sentence structure of this story of catastrophe that's engraved into the surface of the earth. And so that's why I'm taking people out into the field, because ultimately you can look at the photographs, you can look at the drone footage, you can look at LIDAR, but until you're in the field, you don't really get it. You just don't get it. You don't.
Yeah.
After a week in the field, you come back and you go, oh, yes, I do certainly can now believe that this planet is part of a cosmic ecosystem. And we have to be thinking in terms, these large, grand terms, to understand what's happening down here below. We have to look at the big picture. And we are part of a cosmic ecosystem that involves asteroids and comets, the moon, the sun, a variable sun, and what that may imply in terms of history of life and civilization on this planet. So that's what I'm trying to do, is to teach people, as far as I know, and I'm still learning, every day I'm learning, but to teach people, as far as I know, how to read the script so that we can decipher this story.
You just pitched the best Netflix show ever. Like, I want to watch that series on Netflix. You should front that. We need to get producers in. Like, that was an epic pitch.
Well, I have something to talk to you about then, because I may be doing I may be dropping in and doing an appearance with Graham.
Oh man.
Oh, okay.
Secret stuff happening here, folks.
Secret stuff happening. That's so exciting.
But
awesome.
You're right. You're right. I mean, it is the most dramatic tale of our time, in my opinion. And I didn't go, okay, hey, this is so cool because I'm doing it. My approach early on was, what is the most important stuff? What is the most fascinating stuff? What is the coolest stuff we need to know living on Earth at this time? That was kind of my thinking, decades ago. Actually, just as a kid, my second time being thrown out of high school, my thought was, yes, what can I really do? What's going to be the most important stuff that the human species needs to know at this juncture on the planet at this time? And that was kind of my motive back then.
Mm-hmm.
And like, where do I go with this? I want to become, my models were, Da Vinci, Kepler, Pythagoras. Like, I thought to myself, you know what? One of my goals, I think, is going to be to try to become one of the most educated men of my generation. And I don't think I'm there yet, because I know they're out there somewhere. You guys are out there, somewhere out there that knows more than me, and I can sit at your feet. But every year that goes by, the mentors that I looked up to are leaving us. So
now you are the mentor.
No, not yet.
Yeah, you totally are.
No, I'm holding out hope that there's.
You definitely are, because I'm one of the newbies that are trying to take up the mantle and learn, and also get more people involved. And you're going to go down as one of like the godfathers of like ancient civilization research.
I agree.
Well,
embrace your destiny.
That's right.
Yeah. Do I get a lightsaber?
100%.
Yes, absolutely.
I want one. Yeah. I want one.
But only if you go down in the submersive. Then you get a lightsaber.
Right.
Okay.
Well, hey, I want to take before we end this here, I want to thank a bunch of people in the chat. We got someone unseen.
Come back. Speaking of unseen, come back so we can see you guys here at the end.
Oh, okay. We'll turn the whole camera back on. There we are.
There we are.
See, we've been here the whole time.
Who's that?
Someone unseen donated $20. Thank you so much. Anonymous, $20. And then AO donated $50 twice. Thank you so much. really. And Barry,
really,
yeah, Barry, $5. Danny Cox, 25, and Pyramid Man with 20. Thank you guys so much, and all of the rest of the chats. You guys were entertaining. It's so much fun to participate with you guys and watch with the live stream and chat with you all.
Well, I have an opportunity where I can. Oh, go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear though, these monies and the money from the live stream that's coming up, Randall has said, and this is what we're committed to, to creating more and better quality content. Most of it's going to continue to be absolutely free, but we need help. We need to hire some people, so that costs money. So we're going to do these kind of things every once in a while, and we appreciate these super chat contributions, but it's going to make all this better, so we can teach more people and bring more people into this. So Johanna, we're grateful that you're latched on and got your channel, and wanted to plug that. Also, we missed it at the very beginning because you just changed the name, right? It's Funny Old World.
Funny Old World.
Funny Old World.
Funny Old World, because
YouTube.com/Funny Old World with an E on old.
Oh yeah, okay.
So I'll put all the links in the show description and stuff. But yeah, you're doing a great job, and this was awesome having you on. And I think
thanks for having me, guys. I got 2 gold stars and a whole lot of education.
And you do one show, you get 2 gold stars. I've done like 60 shows. I got a half of an attaboy.
half an attaboy, right?
That's just the problem is I have to keep taking those gold stars back.
Yeah.
You get 3 attaboys adds up to a gold star.
All right.
So no, listen, I could, without those 2 guys right there, I don't know if we'd even be doing this.
Well,
yeah, we really, we met personally on our Colorado trip. What was that, 3 years ago?
Yeah, I think so.
Almost 3 years. Yeah.
Yep. 3 years ago. Yeah. We rented a chalet in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado, and we spent 2 weeks exploring. We went to Mesa Verde. We don't have time to talk about that now, but that was certainly an interesting place. But yeah, we hung out together for 10 days. And after, the end of that, we had done, and this is what we do with all our tours. We have Zoom meetings leading up to the tour to brief everybody, because these aren't just sightseeing tours. These are fully immersive learning about the geology and the natural history. So we did a series of Zoom meetings to brief everybody on the objectives, the learning objectives of the tours. And so after the first tour we did together in Colorado, we just thought, hey, why don't we, I think you guys even, Brad and I had been thinking about that it was time for us to start doing a regular podcast. And then we met Russ and Kyle, and it just happened from there.
That's right.
Yeah.
So let me get back to that tour question. The page is not up. It's being worked on. We've had some hurdles with that. So anyway, if you want to just send an email to tours@randallcarlson.com and tell us you want to be on the list, it's over half full already. So if you know that's something you want to take part in, we don't have a price set yet, but it's going to be 4 days, like Randall said, March 13th through the 16th, coming up pretty soon. But that's the best way. Get on the pre-list by sending us a note at tours@randallcarlson.com. And then the Montana trip is full for the June, and Scablands are going to fill up fast. So contact thecabin.com for those.
All right. And we got a few more donations while we were talking there. Rich Gerber, I think, is it $5? Top JJ, $7. Lala C, $20. Tree Climber, $5. And who's that? Not. Is that not John? $5.
Oh, it just says not dot.
I think it's not John. And also, thanks to Ancient Sanctum for helping us moderate in the chat there. Thank you so much. Check her channel out as well. Yep. And another one, Space Cadet, $5. £5.
More better content. Yeah, there comes the money. More better content.
That's right.
It.
So
right.
What do you got coming up, Johanna? Are you going to be doing some new podcasts?
Yeah, I'm heading to Egypt in September, and I'm heading to Peru in November. So I want to get back in, like literally get back on the ground. The minute that I can come to America, I'm going to come see you, and I'm going to come and learn. But yeah, so my aim is to just get out there with my camera and bring as many people with me.
Awesome.
What's your next podcast going to be about?
the next topic I'm looking into is the Atlantis ring that was found in Egypt. There was a ring that was found in a grave, and it was passed down from the Egyptologist to someone who basically studied it, and there was some interesting like electromagnetic thing around this ring. So I'm gonna like look into the ins and outs of the Atlantis ring, because apparently it was from Atlantis. You know, the design of it, the geometric design of it was from it has all like sacred geometry in the ring, and apparently so I didn't know about that till recently, and I was like, cool. And I bought a replica online, and I'm gonna test it. I'm gonna wear it for a while and do a little science experiment and see if the ring does anything good to my energies or not. If not, it's a really cool ring. It's
maybe
really cool.
maybe you'll start remembering some long forgotten lifetimes in Atlantis.
Exactly. That's why I wanted to get it. Apparently it does. Apparently it really like so the guy who Tutankhamun's the tomb, apparently 19 people who went into the tomb in like the 20s died quite suddenly of different causes, apart from the guy who wore a replica Atlantis ring. And that's where people started studying it, like, maybe there's something to do with the ring. Probably not.
The curse of the pharaohs there.
The curse of the pharaoh, exactly.
Yeah,
but
right.
so I thought, I'm going to get myself a ring. So when I'm crawling through the tombs of the pharaohs when I'm in Egypt, I've got my ring and I'm good, and I'm not disturbing anything.
Don't get cursed.
Yeah.
I'm waiting to get cursed. I was hoping it would happen.
You're meddling with the old magic.
Yeah.
Well, I'd never heard of that, so I'll be looking forward to seeing that podcast and learning more about
I will
it. So
send
now
you,
you can teach me something.
Yes.
I like this. I like this. Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, we got more donations. Joseph, $10, and Pyramid Man, another $20. Thank you guys so much.
Oh, really, guys? Thanks.
Yeah.
We appreciate it. We really do. So, hey.
Good night.
One of the great things about how-tos when we do it over there, 95% is going to come to Randall and not whatever crazy 40% going to Google.
Yeah.
Or to YouTube.
Well,
excuse me.
Well, I'm redirecting the how-to right into my bank account. Just straight into my bank. Yeah.
Straight in the bucket.
That's right.
Straight into the bucket. Yeah, that's what the bucket is there for. If you actually look, it's full of money.
The donation bucket.
Yeah.
Right. Another donation from John, $10. Thank you so much.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Well, what do you say, guys?
This has been a lot of fun, and it really was great to have you on, Johanna. So, Johanna, and if we should do it again sometime.
100%.
Whenever when you're ready, because there's all kinds of things we could dive into, and plus I can, I've got a whole mass of stuff that I just am eager to share. And if you want to dive into it just somewhat, and
absolutely, we didn't even get over to Egypt. We kind of got across the Atlantic, and we got there. We didn't even get into Egypt. There's a whole bunch of Egypt stuff that I wanted to.
Let me quick ask you: did you get to the Temple of Hathor at Dendera?
Yes, and I nearly broke my neck like looking up the whole time, because it's just phenomenal.
It is phenomenal. Yeah. Okay.
I did, and I'm gonna definitely go back and relook properly, closely, because I was too overwhelmed. You get overwhelmed in Egypt. You're not sure what you're looking at initially, and then so I want to go back focused.
You
can give me some tips.
Yes, there's some things going on those walls and ceilings, particularly the ceiling. It's all an astronomical allegory. And I'll stick my neck out and I'll say this: what they have done is they have preserved the cosmic history of the human species up on that ceiling.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That is interior design at its best.
There you go. Now that is interior design. Yes. In fact, I think I want a replica of it on the ceiling of the studio that we're going to build.
Me too.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we did actually. I got to say this real quick. About a decade and a half ago, we built a studio for this guy. He's an artist. We added a second story to his house, and on the ceiling, we brought in an artist, and he did a replica of the famous stone. What's it called, Brad? The
Michelangelo with the finger.
No. The stone. It's from Dendera. That was on the ceiling. The astronomical wheel. It has a name.
Remember that one?
I don't remember the name, but I remember seeing it. Yeah, the big. It's like it's all torch. it's blackened by torches, but it's a
yes.
it's a wheel. It has all the symbols on it. Yeah,
that's
it's on the ceiling,
so,
right?
It's on the ceiling.
Yeah,
yeah. And so
very hard to photograph.
We did a replica of that on the ceiling of this guy's studio.
Oh wow!
So that was pretty cool.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm taking 2 rooms. The house that I live in, it was an old farmhouse that was 140 years old, and the original house was just a 2-room cabin. So we're gutting that out, and I'm going to turn that into the new podcast studio. So I'm trying to come up with some really cool stuff to put in there to kind of give it a feel of a kind of a cross between if you're at Plato's Academy, you're in a alchemy lab of the Middle Ages, or, even some high tech stuff kind of all blended together, So that's going to be coming up in the next few months. We're going to be finishing that studio. And so maybe the next time we get together, I'll be in the new studio.
That'll be epic.
All right.
And just one last thing. We nearly got to touch on it, but maybe for another time. One of the things that really got me totally started on researching this stuff is because I'm an actress and I write screenplays, and I have a lot of access to producers and people who want potential screenplays. So I had an idea about writing a dramatic movie about the real Atlantis story, not the Disney one. And that's why I'm collecting also loads of evidence, because I want to put down some kind of screenplay to pitch to people. And when you said that you had ideas about a movie, I was like, right, I think that we should converse about that. Or I want your ideas.
I absolutely would love to
take the Randall Carlson Atlantis movie to my producers and be like, hey, because I think that's also how we're going to get past the mainstream gatekeeping that happens. Because if you put forward like a scientific documentary, they have the right to go, no, we're not going to allow that. But if you're putting forward a Netflix show or a movie, like it can kind of get under the door of the scientists, because you're like, it's just a drama. But is it? But isn't? It's all fact. It's all theory, science theory.
Can I play Plato?
100%. You get to wear your toga.
Okay, we can do a screen test. I'll get my toga out. It's I got to get it out of the closet and dust it off. But
100%. Or you get to be maybe like the first person to die in the deluge. That's also a good role. That's a historical.
I'll do that.
Yeah, to go.
I'll do that.
Okay, that's what you can play.
Yeah,
everyone gets a role. But I think it's an area that there's been no like dramatization of any of this like ancient world stuff. Not really. No. So I think that's part of I don't know. I feel like that might be why I'm called to this area, because that's where my skills and contacts are.
Well, I'm totally serious. I mean, I wasn't exaggerating. I really did script out sort of a treatment for how you would tell this story, and
I would love to hear it.
And the thing of it is I tried to stick as close as possible to the science, because the science itself is so dramatic and so overwhelming and so powerful. You don't need to exaggerate. You don't need hyperbole. It's just, and that's really, to me, what makes the story so powerful, is when you start realizing that, there have been these cosmic catastrophes, and there was a cosmic catastrophe that pretty much destroyed that world.
Yeah.
And this is not pseudoscience anymore.
No, it's the Titanic. It would be the Titanic equivalent of the Younger Dryas deluge. James Cameron, let's get him on board. And I'm putting this out like into the atmosphere. Someone watching is going to be like, I know.
He's got
Mr.
a
Cameron.
mega blockbuster plot laid out. Incredible. So I'm sure
ready.
You guys get to talk about it. So what you need is the storyline and the characters and the people to play through those huge.
That's what I've written.
So this is exciting.
I've written the characters and the storyline. I need Randall for the science, and maybe I'll pitch you my idea, you pitch me yours, and we'll see if they meet. There we go.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And press like if you would like to watch that movie. If you're watching this and you're like, yes, I want to go to the cinema, watch that movie, then smash the like button.
That's right.
Get some feedback.
All right.
Cool.
Well, one more donation here from Matthew. Thank you for $20. And great show, guys. Thank you so much. And ladies.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun. It's now 1 30 in the morning here.
Time
so
to
I've
night over there.
Well, you better get to your bedtime there, Johanna.
Night,
well,
Cap.
Good night, everybody. Good night,
Thanks,
chat.
thanks to everybody in the chat.
Good
Thanks to the
night.
supporters.
Good night.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Night.